morning, everyone. Good morning to our October forum event. Today we are bringing you a Social and Ethics Committee forum event. It is focused on the Social and Ethics Committee trend survey that we conducted a few weeks ago. And now we've compiled it into a report, and it looks at the trends of social and ethics committees across a variety of organizations. It looks at the roles and the responsibilities, the naming conventions, different mandates, and its membership composition. We're very fortunate to have partnered with the Ethics Institute on this, and they have compiled this report with us, and we are going to present it today and discuss it and look at the findings. You will note that this is the third iteration of this particular report. So there are some trends that are coming through that will be discussed by our panelists. And I'm going to get to those right now and introduce them. As par for the course, our events on social and ethics committees are chaired by the chairperson of our Social and Ethics Committee Forum, Professor Dion Rousseau. He's also a member of the King Committee and the CEO of the Ethics Institute. He's been joined by his colleague, Dr. Paul Forster. He's the co-author of the research report and is a research specialist at the Ethics Institute. We bring in the NED experience through our other two panelists. We've got Dr. Simo Lushaba. He's a non-executive director and a social and ethics chairperson on various JSE listed companies. He's also an IoDSA facilitator, and he brings a lot of governance experience. And then Ntombi Longaroids, I'm also a non-executive director and a social and ethics committee chairperson of various JSE listed companies and a member of the Social and Ethics Committee Forum. So I welcome our panelists. We are in good hands. We are going to get a lot of great knowledge and experience and discussion going. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we kick off. You will know that all the chats stay in the chat group. Keep it polite, keep it about the discussion. And then if you want to post a question to the panelists in the Q&A session, please post it into the Q&A box for us to see and then pose to the panelists. I'm going to now hand over to Professor Rousseau, who's going to take this forward, and enjoy yourselves. Enjoy the conversation, and please engage when it comes to the Q&A and have a good chat with our panelists. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the session.
Thank you, and good morning to everyone from Pretoria. Also a very nice and hot day here. Summer rains have started, so we are quite delighted about that. But this morning, the focus is on the Social and Ethics Committee Trend Survey. Now, just by way of background, in 2020, just before COVID started, we launched the Social and Ethics Committee Forum of the Institute of Directors, a joint initiative with the Ethics Institute. And the whole purpose of the Social and Ethics Committee Forum is to always keep an eye on developments that might have certain relevance or implications for social and ethics committees, and then discuss those developments. But another very important objective of the Social and Ethics Committee Forum is also to provide guidance whenever we sense that there are areas where guidance is needed. And up till now, we've launched 3 guidance papers or resources. The first one is a template for drafting a Social and Ethics Committee terms of reference. That is aligned not only with the Companies Act, but also with King IV. Then there was also a guidance paper on repositioning the Social and Ethics Committee, given recent developments that came after the Companies Act and after the publication of King IV. And then just last month, we launched also a paper, guidance paper, on the role of the Social and Ethics Committee when it comes to oversight of organizational ethics. Now, when we started the forum in 2020, we realized that there's very little information available on social and ethics committees. We did not have a good overall picture, and that is why we decided to launch an annual Social and Ethics Committee Trend Survey. And at this stage, after 3 editions of that survey, we now have, I think, a much fuller picture of what is happening around social and ethics committees, how they are composed, how they function, what their big achievements are, but also what their big challenges are. And this is what we will also present to you this morning. But because we now have 3 versions of this survey done in 2020, 2021, and now again in 2022, we can also see some trends developing. And that right from the start was the purpose. And that is also why it is called the Social and Ethics Committee Trend Survey, because we want to see what changes can we detect over time with regards to social and ethics committees. Now, it's quite interesting, just giving you one example of a trend that we have seen over the last 3 years that makes perfect sense. For example, the one question that we ask the chairs of social and ethics committees who participate in this survey is, what is the topic or the theme on which you spend most of your time? In 2020, it was employee safety and health. And of course, that makes sense. COVID just struck all organizations, and there were huge concerns around the safety and health of employees in workplaces. In 2021, when we asked the same question, the issue that received the most attention from social and ethics committees was organizational ethics. Now, if we think back what happened in 2020, we had COVID, big health and safety issues, but then there was huge corruption related to all types of aspects related to the fight against COVID. And therefore, it does not surprise us that in 2021, organizational ethics became the topic that received the most attention. However, this year, the topic that received the most attention over the past year was transformation. So I think that's an indication that we are moving beyond COVID and we are returning to the realities of South Africa. And it also shows us that social and ethics committees are quite dynamic and they keep up with the times. However, there are also concerning things that we find. And in a moment, I'm going to introduce my colleague, Dr. Paul Foster, to give us an overview of the findings. But we can also see that over all 3 editions of the Social and Ethics Committee Trend Survey over the past 3 years, that there's one area that is consistently neglected, and that is our impact on the environment, climate change, and other environmental impact related issues. And that, of course, is a big worry, and we hope that is something that over time we will see a correction. Okay, with that background, I think we can jump into the findings of the 2022 Social and Ethics Committee Trend Survey. And I see my colleague, Dr. Paul Foster is there. Paul, you are still muted, so if you can unmute, then I hand over to you to give us an overview of some of the main findings of this year's report. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you so much, Dion. And colleagues, just bear with me for a second because I do have some Zoom issues. But if we do run into a serious Zoom issue, Judy said that she will run the slides from her side. So just bear with me for a second until I can get this thing to display. If it doesn't, within the next few seconds, Julie, I'm going to ask you maybe just to share your screen with us, if that's okay. It looks like it's giving me serious trouble here. All right.
No problem, Paul. Do you just want to give it one more second? But I'm happy to also share if you unshare.
Yeah, I think it's better that you just share, Julie. I think yeah, it's giving me some issues. Sorry, colleagues, I had a soft crash of my laptop, so apologies for that. All right, so I think let's dive right in. It's again great to be here to actually report on the Social and Ethics Committee Trend Survey. And as Dion has mentioned, there have been quite a few patterns in the data that we've started to see, and a fuller picture, I think, is emerging around the state of social and ethics committees in South Africa. Before we continue, I'd also just like to give a bit of a shout out to my other colleague, Annie Oyang, who co-researched and co-worked on this paper with me. So it was fun. We learned quite a bit. Please go ahead, Julie. All right, so colleagues, our main aim ultimately is to get some form of representative data on social ethics committees operating in South Africa, to understand how they function, and to understand what challenges they may be facing, but also what are they paying attention to? What are the things that they care about? What is preoccupying them, so to speak? And it was also important for us to start creating a comparative benchmark so that we can start to track what is happening, firstly, with social ethics committees over time, but also to see year on year, exactly what is changing. And what is fascinating is this has been a bit of a microcosm of research for us because we've had COVID, which has disrupted things tremendously in 2020. And we saw major changes in the Social and Ethics Committee and what they pay attention to, as Dion indicated earlier. And then again, with the return back to work, but also the fact that, we're in the midst of the Great Resignation. People are redefining their work roles and particularly how they engage with work. That has also had a major impact on the results, specifically this year. So I think if we look at these results through the lens of context, it starts to make quite a bit of sense. There are also very encouraging findings. Now, last year, we had 91 organizations that partook in the survey. This year, we had 87. But there is a bit of a difference in the makeup of this year's sample, particularly with larger organizations and listed companies making up the majority of organizations this time around. What we wanted to understand is firstly the nature, the composition, as well as the perceived effectiveness of SECs. The challenges and impediments that they encounter, what stops them from being able to engage in their mandate? What challenges are they facing in terms of ethics, and also the delegation, of the management of ethics within organizations? And I think also providing some comparison to last year, which would be interesting. All right, so let's look at the characteristics of the sample. So colleagues, you'll notice that the darker purple there is 2022 results, and the lighter purple, almost pink, is 2021's results. And if you notice here, you'll see that we have far more large organizations that took part this year. Additionally, you'll also notice that mid-sized organizations dropped off. So we actually have more representation of large organizations than medium-sized organizations, with SMEs also slightly up this year. So we actually have about 1% more in our sample than we did the previous year. So the sample really does reflect larger organizations to a greater extent than in 2021. And I think that needs to be taken into consideration when we look at the results, because larger organizations often are mandated more to have a social ethics committee present, or to actually establish one in the organization. All right, so as you can see here, we have about the same amount of listed companies that are represented this year, with slightly more large private organizations. State-owned companies, interestingly enough, made up a much larger proportion of this year's sample than last year. So that also tells us a little bit about what's happening in our state-owned sector, state-owned company sector. Non-profits dropped slightly, although we still had good representation there. And as you can notice, small and medium private enterprises dropped substantially from the previous year. So again, the sample is composed of more larger organizations than we had in 2021. All right, so let's dive into the characteristics of the Social and Ethics Committee. So one of the questions that we ask the chair of the Social and Ethics Committee, this is how the survey is run. We actually ask them to compile information or to delegate that information, or delegate the compiling of that information to someone in the Social and Ethics Committee itself. And year on year, we asked, what do you call your Social and Ethics Committee? And there were many different designations that were provided over the years. But it appears that this year, Social Ethics Committee, the actual term Social Ethics Committee, is what most SECs call themselves, approximately 81% in comparison to 55% last year. And this also just indicates that if you look at your larger and listed companies, they generally go for the standard Social Ethics Committee. But it also might be that smaller organizations sometimes share this function with other board functions. So that when we looked at our sample last year, we had many more smaller organizations that had different names for their Social and Ethics Committee. You'll also notice that, we actually supplanted the Social Ethics and Transformation Committee from 2021 with Social Ethics and Human Resource Committee this time around. So it's interesting that those two functions work together in some organizations. Also, other terms that are used are Social Ethics and Sustainability Committee, 1% this year, 6% last year, Human Capital Committee, as well as Audit and Finance Committee, which is something we saw this year but did not see last year, which is quite interesting. So a variety of names, and also indicates that these things sometimes, that often there are shared functions when it comes to these board committees. We also ask social ethics committees what their primary reason for establishment is. In other words, why have you established a social ethics committee? And very encouraging result this year, where we actually 57% of the organization said, well, our primary reason for establishing an SEC is to be proactive, to build an ethical culture in the organization, and to ensure that there is good oversight regarding ethics in the organization. And this is extremely encouraging. It means that organizations are indeed starting to see the value of the Social and Ethics Committee. You'll notice here that it's up 57% from last year's 43%. Compliance with the Company Act dropped substantially from last year, so only 20%, but still a substantial number, indicating that we have established an SEC purely because we want to comply with the Companies Act, where that was 37% last year. And about the same, compliance with King 4 recommendations, 19% of the SECs indicated that is their primary reason. And substantially more, about 4% said for reactive reasons, particularly relating to corporate scandals, which was quite interesting, especially if we consider the turmoil that we saw in 2021. It's probably a reaction to that. We also ask social ethics committees, are you a standalone committee? In other words, do you share functions with other committees? For example, that would mean that you're not a standalone committee. And often the name also indicates that, it says Social and Audit Committee or Social and Transformation Committee or something similar. Social Ethics and Transformation Committee is one that's also been used quite a lot and has been combined. But what is quite encouraging is that in 2022, and just remember again to put the lens of a number of more larger organizations in the sample onto this, but you'll notice that 85% said this year that they are a standalone committee. So they function as a social ethics committee without sharing any of these functions with any other board committees, with 15% indicating that they are not an independent committee. Now, if you compare that to last year, 69% indicated that they're a standalone, with 31% saying that they share a function. But again, just remember that last year we had many more smaller organizations and medium-sized organizations that often share these functions. What this may indicate is that in larger organizations or listed companies, the Social and Ethics Committee tends to be a standalone committee. We also ask them whether they have an approved terms of reference, which is quite important in order to look at what the Social and Ethics Committee aims to achieve in a period and whether this has been ratified in the organization. And we can see here the numbers are quite similar. 94% indicated that they have an approved terms of reference, with 6% indicating they do not yet have one. This is actually a bit better than last year, where 91% said that they had an approved terms of reference and 9% indicated they did not. So again, this might also have to do with the sample and the makeup of the sample. We also asked them, are reports on organizational ethics management submitted to the Social and Ethics Committee, right? So this is quite important. We're trying to sort of pick out whether or not the Social and Ethics Committee is actually sort of mandating the management of ethics in the organization and receiving information from that management function regarding how the organization is operating. And if you look here, you'll see that, again, the numbers are close, with a slightly higher number in 2022, 83% indicating yes, so they are receiving that information, 13% saying no, and 5% saying sometimes. So it's not reliable, but we get it occasionally. Now, this is also interesting if you compare it to last year. 76%, only said that yes, they do obtain reports on organizational ethics management as submitted to the SEC. So this is encouraging. It does demonstrate that the SEC is being informed by the ethics management function of what's going on in the organization. It also indicates that there is an ethics management function in the organization itself. All right, so if you look at some of the SEC matters on the board agenda, we asked to what extent are these items either a standing item at board meetings in terms of SEC matters, or whether SEC matters are ad hoc, or whether they are, discussed under other matters, sort of seen as unimportant to some extent. And what we noticed here is that there was a slight decrease from the previous year, but that the majority of organizations indicated that SEC matters are a standing item in board meetings, with approximately 78% indicating such. That is a very encouraging result, although it is slightly lower from last year. Furthermore, SEC matters are an ad hoc item, so they are not standing but ad hoc as necessary. 21% indicated that is the case, slightly higher than last year, where only 16% indicated. But what is most encouraging is that, a fewer, about half, you could say, a percent down from last year, that SEC matters are usually discussed under other matters. So this is actually a very, very infrequent that this occurs in organizations, that the SEC matters are discussed under other matters at the end of board meetings. So it does indicate some primacy regarding social and ethics committee matters and how they are integrated into board meetings themselves, and then of course actioned. We also asked about the SEC reporting to the AGM. And interestingly, now we have quite different results from 2021. And again, I'm going to just reiterate that, remember, we have many more larger organizations and listed companies in this sample. So this does make sense that it would differ slightly from last year. But SEC activities are reported to the AGM through a written report. What is interesting here is that 46% said that they submit a written report. So not verbal, purely a written report at the AGM. 26% last year indicated that they only submitted a written report. Now, this is quite interesting because if you look at 2021, most people, we had quite a large percentage of people saying that SEC activities are reported to the AGM through both written and verbal reports. So it's not only presented as a written report, but also discussed to some extent. And this is ultimately what we actually want. We want more dialogue on these matters in the organization. And this has changed massively in 2022, where this is purely more written than it is also written and verbal. And you'll notice there that only 36% compared to 53% in 2021 indicated that SEC activities are reported to the AGM through both a written and verbal report. So the majority is done through only a written report. The same number, about 13%, and this is a bit worrying that there's, because this is a substantial number, but SEC activities are not reported at all. About 13% of the SECs we sampled indicated that. And then 5% said that SEC activities are reported to the AGM through a verbal report only, which dropped a little bit from 2021, where it was at 9%. So colleagues, this may indicate that we may be losing a bit of dialogue regarding SEC activities, at the AGM itself, that it is more formal, but this may also again be due to the nature of the sample. All right, so we also looked at the time investment of SECs, and Dion earlier alluded to some of this, but here are the results. And as you can see here, the thing that really occupies the most time for SECs in 2022 is employment equity. So this was quite high, but interestingly enough, followed very closely by organizational ethics. And as Dion said earlier, this is quite something to behold, because if you look at organizational ethics and the mandate for organizational ethics, this is not mandated by law. So the organization itself is taking active steps, proactive steps, to actually manage organizational ethics, which came in a second. You'll also notice there that broad-based Black economic empowerment has also become a major issue for social and ethics committees. And the employment equity concerns, as well as the BBBE issues that may be arising and dominating some of the time of the SECs, may be due to the fact that there's a bit of turmoil in the job market at the moment, after COVID, after lockdown. So that may influence these results slightly. You'll notice that employee safety and health has dropped now from 2020 all the way down to 4th place, fraud and corruption prevention in 5th place, and then community development. So these are ultimately the main areas that SECs focus on currently in 2022. We also looked at the least time spent. And again, here, there were some worrying signs, just 2 worrying signs, particularly around the environment itself. But you'll notice here that responsible and transparent tax practices are things that are not really primal for social and ethics committees, advertising. But interestingly, if you look here, you'll see biodiversity and climate change mitigation were also of least concern to social and ethics committees. And I think those 2 are a bit worrying. But it also talks a little bit, I think, to the South African context at the moment. And also, if you look there, you'll see consumer protection also doesn't receive much attention, and neither do sustainable development goals. So there's definitely some work to be done by SECs to bring, biodiversity, particularly elements around ESG and the environment specifically, more into focus for organizations. All right, so we also asked which operational departments or divisions regularly attend SEC meetings. So this item actually acts as a bit of a proxy to understand who is engaging with the Social and Ethics Committee in the organization, and to what extent are they engaging with the Social and Ethics Committee. And what's fascinating is that, of course, we notice here that the CEO, the MD or Director General, depending on what sector you're in, engages the most. This is slightly down from 2021, but 18%. Human resources, interestingly, are still top of the log very much, engaging with the Social and Ethics Committee quite regularly, then compliance, then risk, then the ethics management function, and of course that ethics management function can either be an independent one or one that is shared by some other division or department, internal audit, then procurement, and then it starts falling down, sustainability, labor, and then forensics right at the bottom. So it still appears that that of course the leadership of the organization, the human resources division or departments, compliance and risk are very much the ones that engage the most with the Social and Ethics Committee and attend their meetings, which makes absolute sense. All right, so let's look at some of the SEC vital statistics. These are just some statistics that indicate, some of the characteristics of social and ethics committees out there. And not much has really changed from 2021. There's been slight movements here and there. But let me take you through it quickly. So one of the questions we ask is, how many members does your SEC consist of? And the average is still 5, right? So of course, remember that the median is the middlemost category, and it's not affected by extreme scores, but it's also 5. And the lowest is 0 for some organizations in 2021. For 2022, the lowest was 2. So this could also indicate SECs that might just be starting their mandate. And the highest being 16 in 2022. So between 2 and 16 members, with the average being 5 members. How many members of your SEC are non-executive directors? So interestingly, this number is still about 3. So quite a substantial number on average, if you especially consider the average number is 5, that 3 of those 5 are non-executive directors. This has stayed quite the same across the median. The lowest in some organizations is none, with the highest being 11. What is your annual remuneration cost to company per annum for the SEC chairperson? So again, here you can see the remuneration there. And the average that I would really focus on is that average for 2022 at 186,791 Rand. So it is fascinating that if we look, we're going to go to the next slide shortly just to look at the remuneration of different committees. But the SEC is still the lowest remunerated committee out of all other board committees. And this is a bit worrying, colleagues. It kind of indicates that there might be something not quite right here, because usually we say that organizations care about the things they pay for, right? If they pay for something, that indicates their values. So there's a bit of a worry there. The other thing as well that was quite interesting is that we have a major representation of women in SECs. In fact, it is reaching parity with about 45% representativity of women in SECs in particular. So they are actually SECs lead the way in terms of female representation. Now, that's a very good sign. But if you were to compare that, mostly female members, as well as the lowest paid, it starts painting a picture that maybe we should look closer at whether organizations really view the SEC as legitimate, and whether or not they just view elements that the SEC engages with as soft issues. So, but that is something I will leave for the panel to discuss a bit later. They also indicate, please, who are the invitees or the number of invitees who attend the SEC. So these are non-members. And on average, this is about 4, but it can be up to 18 in some SECs. And how often does the SEC meet per year? The average number being 3 times a year, the median being about 4. So it depends, of course, where you catch them in terms of the survey as well. The highest number was 6, which was the same as 2021. So meeting 6 times over a 12-month period. All right, so here are some of the remuneration guidelines, and thank you very much to the IoDSA, who made their non-executive directors fees guide data available for 2022. I know the report has not yet been compiled or completed, so it's great to kind of get a bit of a hint of what people are remunerated in the different committees. And if you look here, you'll notice that the audit committee sits at the highest there, 325,741 Rand per annum. This is an average, just to indicate, so it can be higher, it can also be lower. The remuneration committee, they're at 229,374 Rand per annum, just below the audit committee, followed by the risk committee at 287,477 Rand per annum. Then the nomination committee, 187,620, that's a huge drop, but normally the nomination committee is often viewed a bit as an ad hoc committee. And even though that is the case, the Social Ethics Committee still ranks the lowest in terms of the average remuneration. So again, colleagues, this raises interesting questions about the perceived value, or perhaps even the perceived legitimacy of social ethics committees. Why are they paid the lowest? And also there is a phenomenon in the social sciences where we notice that when and this is it's unfortunately a problem, that when more women enter into a profession, for some reason, the average amount or the average pay actually drops down. And it is no coincidence that we have a low income there, but also have the most female members being represented on the Social and Ethics Committee. So there's definitely some work that needs to be done there. And I think especially those that champion gender equity in the workplace, there's quite a bit I think that we need to do with Social and Ethics Committees going forward. All right, so then we also asked about the impact of the Social and Ethics Committee and the clarity of their mandate. So the first thing here is we asked them, how clear is your mandate? Do you add value, etc. And if you look here, you'll notice that 78%, slightly higher than 2021, which is quite encouraging, indicated that the King 4 report provides enough guidance on SEC operations. So that's slightly up, and I wonder if that has something to do with the guidance papers as well that has been released in that time. You'll also notice here that to what extent does the SEC add value? This has dropped slightly down, about 5% from last year, but still relatively high at 73%. So the vast majority indicating that they feel they do add value. How effective is the SEC? Again, very close to last year's findings, 2% drop, 72% indicating that they believe that it is highly effective. Does the Companies Act provide enough guidance on SEC operations? And interestingly, if you compare this one with does the King 4 report provide enough guidance, you'll notice that there appears to be more guidance received by SECs. They are clearer on their mandates compared to last year. So 66% indicating that yes, there is enough guidance. Of course, there is some room for improvement there. How important is the SEC in comparison to other committees? Here we had a small but substantial drop. You'll notice here that 65% indicated that it is important, with compared to last year, where 74% indicated that it is important. All right, we also looked at some mandate challenges. These are things that may hamper the mandate of the SEC or make the life difficult for the Social and Ethics Committee, broadly speaking. And here you can see we listed them from those that had the highest mandate challenges to those with the lowest mandate challenges, or those things that don't really affect or never really affect the organization in terms of the SEC's mandate. And you'll notice here that at the top of this list, the number one thing that hampers the mandate of the SEC is the SEC's agenda being too broad, that there's just too much to look at under the mandate of the Social and Ethics Committee. You'll also notice that the second one there, the SEC focusing too much on compliance at the expense of business ethics. So that's another element that really is something that SECs are aware of. Also, you'll notice the third one there, the role or mandate of the SEC not being understood in the organization. So in other words, people not knowing what the SEC does or why it is important. And also the SEC being viewed as unimportant in relation, to other committees. So there as well, there is, a bit of an issue there. So again, we're noticing a cluster of items which are indicating that there is some legitimacy concerns in the sense of, do we actually feel that the SEC adds as much value as many of the other board committees? And this is still something that SECs worry about and feel that there's not enough. And if we compare that to what members of the SEC are paid, I don't think that they are far off in their understanding of this. Also, they said that a lack of quality reports provided to the SEC, although this is now a substantial drop, there's much less people that have said that this happens most of the time or always, but that can also hamper the mandate of the SEC and does happen. Also, insufficient executive management and buy-in. And then we start getting into environmental factors such as corruption, fraud, and unethical behavior in the organization, which may hamper the mandate, the scope and guidelines provided by legislation not giving enough clear guidance, and also insufficient board buy-in and support for the SEC. So this is telling a story, and I think indeed it is saying that the SEC requires a lot more enablement and empowerment in the organization, particularly by senior leaders and the board proper. As a committee that adds massive value and actually does not just deal with soft issues. And I hate that term, soft issues, as it is attached to the Social and Ethics Committee. All right, so in conclusion, I think the results are quite promising. We've noticed that there is definitely growth of SECs and particularly how they operate. Most SECs established for proactive reasons, as we've seen in the results. We're doing it because we really want to manage our ethics and ensure that we build an ethical culture. There's also much higher reporting of activities at the AGM. So again, it seems that the SEC is indeed finding its voice. There's also a high level of confidence in the impact of the SEC, that it actually is making a difference in the organization itself, and also far more clarity in this round in terms of guidance of SEC operations. And also, as I mentioned, there is also a lot more gender parity in comparison to last year's results, with SECs outperforming most other committees, and this can be found in the report regarding female representation on SECs themselves. So I think these are encouraging results. There are still challenges that remain. As I said, SEC remuneration is still the lowest. The mandate of the SEC is still poorly understood or a bit ambiguous in some organizations, and I think that's definitely something that the SECs themselves can work on. The SEC seems to focus more on compliance at the expense of effective oversight in some cases, and many SECs claim that their agendas are just too broad. There's too much for them to do, and then they often focus in certain areas. So colleagues, thank you for the time, and I hope that this has given you some insight into the state of social and ethics committees in South Africa. Dion, over to you.
Thank you, Paul, for the presentation, but also to you and Annie for preparing the report, and also to Julie and Vicky from the IoDSA also for their inputs to make this available. What Paul has presented to you now is a high-level overview of the findings, but the full report will be made available to you. You can download it from the website of the IoDSA. But we also made the full report available to our two panelists, and I would like to invite the first of them, Dr. Simo Lushaba, to come on screen, unmute and come on screen. In the meantime, I would like to invite all of you to please make full use of the Q&A function. It's good to see that the first questions has already started coming in there. And Julie, there's probably one that you can attend to, one by Suresh Naidu, regarding the numbers of that remuneration. So if you maybe can just type an answer there. for everyone to see, that would be great. But Simo, I'm very interested to get your take. In other words, when you now listened, but also had a look at the full report, what are the things that sort of jumped out for you, or that concerns you or excites you? Please give us your take on the findings of the 2022 SEC Trend Survey.
Thank you very much, Dion. Colleagues, good morning, and it's a pleasure to join you this morning to share some thoughts on the trends that have just been shared with us. I think, first of all, the initial area is to see how the social and ethics is being understood in the right context of governance. So I see from the report that's just been released that bulk of the reasons for forming the Social and Ethics Committee go to the establishment on management and enhancement of the ethics culture. We will remember that when you go through the Companies Act, for instance, even though this is the Social and Ethics Committee, it did not say anything about the ethics responsibility of the committee. That was introduced by King 4 at a later stage, but looking at the fact that management of ethics is very important. So it's very exciting for me to see that the majority of the reasons and still improving are actually based on the establishment and management of the ethics culture in the organizations. It says to me that we are focusing on the right things, and we actually are understanding that governance, whilst compliance is important, no one is actually underplaying the importance of compliance, but governance is more than compliance. There is a purpose for which we want to actually perform. When you go look at the King report, it actually says that the Ethics Committee should oversee compliance performance. And we would remember that in terms of the key outcomes of ethical effective leadership that King 4 talks to, good performance is one of them. So we want to see good performance in the area of ethics and ethical culture in the organization. And it's good to see that boards are being deliberate about it. They see it as a core reason for establishing the Social and Ethics Committee. The reports are also showing that there is a growing trend, 76 to 83%, I think it was shared just now, in terms of reports on ethics management that are coming to the board from management, which also says there is real work that management is performing that underpins this reason for which we are mostly forming ethics committees for. And for me, Dion, that is extremely exciting, and I think it's a very good trend. It also shows that we are not just doing governance for compliance sake. It's not a tick box exercise. We're doing governance because there is an objective to move from a certain level in as far as ethics and ethical culture is concerned to a certain level, and it's in the right direction. So I think over a period of time, that should start showing us some of the results that we are looking for. In terms of the social and ethics issues, I think the comment was also made just now that they are still the primacy of the matters that are discussed, or some of the matters that are discussed by boards, even though we are seeing more written reports and less verbal discussions in the AGMs, and we will need to understand that. But I think we must also look at other things that have also taken the space at AGMs. I don't think it indicates a significant decrease in the focus, because in many of the AGMs I've been to, ESG is very, very topical, and possibly people do not necessarily link that to the work of the social and ethics committees. It might be getting discussed as standalone. I would not know, but we will have to do some more introspection in that regard. Very disappointing is to see that ethics committees, social and ethics committees, are still the lowest remunerated in the spectrum of committees of the board. We will need to understand that, but I'm also disturbed by the fact that majority of those members are women, because we generally have a history of paying little or lesser to ladies than we pay to their male counterparts. So I'm not sure whether that is also in that regard, but generally speaking, I think we need to recognize the significance of social and ethics issues. I've always argued that one of the major problems that this committee faces is that matters that we deal with are not everyday crisis matters, but the problem is the day they actually become a crisis, they really affect the organization, and therefore the impact is higher. But the level of appreciation is not front of our minds because it's not an area that we actually find in a crisis all the time. So it might then be spilling out to how we see the significance of this particular committee in as far as what it is discussing. But in the trends of what's being discussed from 2020 being employee health and wellness, to health and safety, to organizational ethics in 2021, to transformation, presently looking more at what are our key challenges as a country. I think that's a correct trend. I think we are actually seeing that the committee is discussing the relevant issues that are important for organizations at a given point in time. So we could conclude that the committee, from a governance perspective, has its finger in the pulse. I just want to stop there, Dion, to give other colleagues an opportunity and make those highlights. Thank you very much. Thanks, Dion.
Thanks, Simo, for highlighting those. I think very important aspects that you have highlighted for us there, and we will come back to them. They are definitely some of the talking points that we will attend to. And it's great to see all the activity in the chat. Just saw one from Getty Similane as well. She joined us as a panelist last month when we had our previous conversation. So welcome to you as well, Getty. Also nice to see people as far afield as Botswana and Mozambique joining us this morning. But let's move on to Ntombi. Ntombi is joining us actually from London this morning. So we really have international audience and participation here. I won't ask you to explain the reason for being in London, Ntombi. But as a very experienced non-executive director, heavily involved also in social and ethics committees, what stood out for you when you read the report, but also listened to Paul's presentation this morning?
I think, morning everybody, yes, and I will explain the reason why I'm in London. I'm very excited. I have just become a granny, so my daughter's had a baby boy, and I'm out here trying to help out and do the good African thing of being a granny. But to get back to the report, I think a lot of the stuff that I picked up on has been discussed in one form or another, but I just wanted to reiterate a couple of what I think are important considerations for particularly non-executive participants on this webinar. It's the whole issue, and this may be to do with the sample, firstly, right? So there's a lean towards large organizations which are in the technology space, right? Which means that the outcomes are influenced by that, right? So for me, I'm sort of saying, is that only true for that space, or is it true for other spaces? In other words, the outcomes, are they true for every space? And I have to say, I am not personally in the technology space, and I could link into those outcomes and findings. So therefore, I think it may be correct to say it is true for some other industries as well. So I do like the fact that it seems to be across all industries, and I'm really liking the fact that we seem to be there's a growing attention to SME issues and concerns. I'm concerned about the fact that we are not linking enough of ESG Right now, that's very, it's difficult to say why not, right? When ESG is everybody's conversation these days, may well be, as the report sort of leans towards or seems to indicate, is that perhaps the ESG issues are being taken care of in other committees, right? And I do think that that might be something that we need to reconsider on the nomination side in terms of each board to say, where does this responsibility lie? Right, and who can drive it on the boardroom table? This actually may be an opportunity, if that happens, to put the Social and Ethics Committee on a different level, and perhaps also look at increasing the fees, because the fees become a big problem because they bring out a whole lot of stuff about what we think. Also, what's concerning me is the fact that it's women, right, who are generally in there. And I just wonder whether this is a corporate or an entity's excuse for or way of saying we are doing some sort of inclusivity and diversity. So therefore we have women on our board, and they're Black women, and they are, you know, on the Social and Ethics Committee because, you know, those are the things that women are interested in. I'm not sure whether that's the thinking, but it does take one to think that way. And I think, you know, boards should be aware and alerted to the fact that, you know, whilst we're very excited about the number of women that they're bringing forward and putting on boards, they must be careful about where they put them, in what roles they put them, and what kind of recruitment processes they use, or the kinds of skills that they're looking for when they do that. And that links back to the skills of the people on the committee. We heard Paul, and I think Sim also related to the fact that you know, there's an increased number of skills that are being used, and the areas of focus of the committee are changing, right, or being adjusted. I think this may be a useful opportunity to actually bring in different skills, different and varied skills. And maybe we need to look at that in terms of Social and Ethics Committee compilation, or you know, how they're compiled. Because if we look at the topics that were covered, or has the least interest, or there's more interest in forensics and labor and procurement risk, right? It tends to indicate that we need to bring in people of that kind of skills profile, right? But at the same time, right, we're finding that the least amount of time is spent on things like the SDG goals, which link to ESG, right? Tax practices, advertising, which is stakeholder management as well. Climate change, ESG, you know, so maybe if we change the profile or the skills profile of the committee members, there'll be better focus on ESG. I'm just sort of looking at those sorts of things as possibilities. I am, however, excited that, you know, we are doing much more, and we're linking it to a much broader worldview on what is going on in businesses. So I'm excited. Overall, I'm excited in the direction things are going, and I look forward to any questions or comments that colleagues may have. Thank you, Dion.
Thank you, Natombi. And I want to start with two of the areas that you mentioned. The one is the skill sets of the members of the committee, and the other one is the ESG. And I want to go back to questions that we've received in this regard. And let's start with the whole skill set. In other words, what is the knowledge, the experience that we would like people to have serving on the Social and Ethics Committee? And Peter asked specifically about what are the essential qualities and attributes required for a Social and Ethics Committee member. Simo, can we start with you? And Natombi, if you want to elaborate further on that, it would be great. So maybe both of you can now stay on screen as we move through these questions. But Simo, over to you.
Thanks, Dion. No, when you say we must stay on screen, it sounds like you're saying the heat is on. Yeah, look, for me, I think the first and most important skill is social intelligence. You want people who understand the social implications of the behavior, the culture, and the decisions that we make as organizations. You know, I served on the board of mining for about 19 years. One of the top companies on whose boards I've served is in mining. And I also worked as a vice president in mining. One of the things I realized one day in my position as a vice president, the community came and said, look, we're here to tell you that we want you to pack and leave. And we knew what were the issues. We kind of had a sense of where they were coming from. We brought the leaders into the boardroom. We tried to talk to them about the issues that we were having. And it was really the fact that many of our colleagues that had left the hostels based on the living out allowance had gone to stay in informal settlements. And the community was feeling that we were overcrowding them, we were creating problems because their clinics were fuller, their classrooms were fuller, the whole functioning of the community was impacted by this decision that we had taken to pay a living out allowance. But when the community came, they said to us, no, we just want you to listen to us for a change, because you always talk. You know, whenever we come here, you put those slide presentations on the wall and you want us to sit and listen. And we've done that over many years. But we want you to know that the reason we've come to a conclusion that you must pack and leave, it's because we have realized that all our pain and suffering started when you guys located yourself amongst us. They said from the 1930s, you actually explored for your minerals. We had to be moved from where we lived. When you had found the minerals that you wanted, we now live in cramped villages. We lost our land, grazing land, heritage land, and all sorts of other valuable, sentimental things to us as a community. Then you did not want to employ us and our children. So you went to Mozambique, KwaZulu-Natal, Eastern Cape, Lesotho. You brought the people you wanted to work with. Now that you are fighting with those people, now that you see what you did, bringing them across here is not sustainable, it's not working, you are now dumping them on us. So this is like a 100-year trend, almost, where we are today, because they started us from the 30s. None of us was awake to that, because in our professions, we deal with the here and now. We don't have the social intelligence of tracking the social impact over such a long period of time. We made decisions that made sense at a given point in time. But when you start to look at these decisions, looking at a trend in terms of social intelligence, you realize that cumulatively, they have a huge impact on the community, and there is no way. So they said to us, you can't change what was done in the 30s, can't change what was done in the 60s, but we live it every day here and now. And basically you are adding to that. So to you, it looks small. To us, any cumulative effect on this trend is a huge blow. So for me, that's very important. You also need to understand how human behavior works, issues of trends in terms of culture, and how to excite and inspire people and focus them in building a bigger, better, brighter future than mourning about the past problems and setbacks. Instead, use those as an asset to tackle the future. So excite us, give us energy today, because the future is bigger, better, brighter, and make us have a source of pride about where we come from. That for me is the kind of leadership that you would want to see out of the social and ethics. So it's not a committee that is there to only leave resolution of problems, finding solutions to what had happened in the past. It's also a committee that needs to take us forward. And I really think you need people who are futuristic, and you need people who are strategic thinkers in terms of their orientation. Let me leave for Ntombi the harder ones. So I've taken all the easier ones, Ntombi.
Yeah, but it is incredibly important what you've just said this whole element of the social intelligence. In other words, the ability to read communities. but also an environmental and economic intelligence that goes with that, hand in hand. And especially the thing that you said towards the end, Simo, when you talked about being strategic and forward-looking. In other words, not just monitoring, ticking boxes, making sure that there's compliance, but really looking at the performance and impact of organizations. But yeah, Natombi, we are still at the question of what are the skill sets, the attributes, the qualities that you're looking for. And let's say you are now, as you are a chair of a social and ethics committees, and you are looking for new members. What are those qualities that you're looking for?
Yeah, I think that, a lot of what Simo said really rang true for me, right, as well. But the whole issue around empathetic, and maybe in a sense it goes to the fact that women are said to be far more empathetic than males, so that's why the company appoints women in the social and ethics committees. But still, I mean, men can also be empathetic. It's not a quality which is exclusive to females. So for me, there's an issue of being empathetic, but also the ability to see far and wide, right? And not just be tunnel visioned in what you're dealing with, right? And this is what Simo was actually relating to. And I think that, the mining world gives us so many different examples. When, in the last couple of months, we've had to deal with the whole Zama story and what has happened in the east, in the west rand of the Gauteng province, all that horrific stuff that occurred there. But the social and ethics committees of those businesses involved, and I'm not saying only the mines, it's also the entrepreneurial businesses around there, right? Where you see a completely different sort of trajectory as to what had previously been thought was going to be the trajectory of the area, now taking force, right? We've got issues with who are Zamazamas, right? What is their role in the society? Who's actually funding them, right? What are the kinds of lifestyles are they breeding and coming together? Because we're talking about young people, small, young boys who haven't had a different opportunity and know only that, the whole story around gangs, and the groupthink and culture that develops as a result of that, and how that impacts that community. What are the kinds of, what kind of businesses are coming up there in that community, and what kind of future are we giving the children who grow up in that environment? What are the municipal facilities that we provide in the areas or don't provide in the areas? Even safety and security, are the cops too scared to go there? So I mean, that's just one example. You go to KZN, and what happened with the floods, and the business. The burning down of businesses, etc., and the anger that came there. I believe recently, Johannesburg, there's been issues in the Diepsloot area. How did Diepsloot develop, right? Why is it in the space that it is in? Why is it that it's easy for our electrical suppliers to switch off that electricity in the lower income areas and not so easy in other areas? So we need to have social and ethics members who've got the skills to put these things together. And I think they're called strategic operational skills or operational skills. So people who can see beyond the actual incidences and events and link them up and create a storyline, and then be able to say, this storyline is leading us to a trajectory that is going to, go completely wrong, right? And we'd rather go in a different direction. And I'm sitting here in the United Kingdom, and we've had all the chaos that has occurred politically, right? And it's an interesting thing to see unfold, because we tend to, relate to political turmoil in Africa, and the first worlds don't do that kind of thing, and it's unfolding itself here. And even here, I was saying in a different forum that the levels of poverty which I'm seeing and this is not an empirical study, it's just my observation over my time here, the levels of poverty and the kinds of poverty, if there's that, are still very relevant in a first world country, similarly to a third world country. It's just perhaps the emphasis that's different. And so as a social and ethics person, one should be able to say, how does that impact the trajectory that we intend to leave as a legacy for our children?
Okay, great. I see there's also a few questions coming in, and can I encourage all of you to make use of the Q&A to put more questions in there, but there are a few of a more factual nature, and let me just quickly deal with them. Suresh's question has been answered in the Q&A, so Suresh, you would see the answer there related to remuneration. Then Craig asked a question, and there was a similar question also in the chat around training for social and ethics committee members. How can we train people? Well, the IOD does offer a social and ethics committee training workshop or half-day training workshop. They collaborate with us at the Ethics Institute, so we do all those trainings on their behalf. And just last Friday, we had our last one for this year. It's available both in an open format, so please look out for next year's IOD training program. But you can also do it in-house. In other words, a training specifically just for your social and ethics committee. And then Royet asked the question to see and said, with surprise, noted that some SMEs also have social and ethics committees. In other words, small and medium enterprises with social and ethics committees. And the question is it required for small and medium enterprises, or is it voluntary? The answer to that is both, in the sense that there are three categories of companies who are required to have social and ethics committees. The one is all listed companies and all state-owned companies. But then there's a third category that says if you have a public interest score of 500 points or higher in any two of the last 5 years, you are a so-called public interest company, and many SMEs do fit into that category, and therefore they are also required by law, if they have a public interest score of higher than 500 points, to establish the social and ethics committee, and it's then a statutory one. But then King 4 made a very specific recommendation and said, not only those organizations who are required by law to have a social and ethics committee should govern their social and ethics performance, but all organizations, irrespective of whether you are required by law or not, whether you are listed, not listed, for-profit, non-profit, your social and ethics performance is a huge part of your sustainability, and therefore all organizations should have that. The one issue, Natombi, that you picked up is the whole matter of ESG. And we also saw in the survey itself that especially the environmental dimension of ESG is quite neglected. We have a question from Boitumelu, and maybe Simo, we can start with you again, since Natombi already said something about that. But Natombi, I want you to also follow up after that. And Boitemelu's question is, should there be a separate social and ethics committee and a separate ESG committee? Or should the social and ethics committee also look at ESG related matters as part of the way in which they execute their mandate?
I am inclined to say more of the latter. Although environments differ, Dion, we don't necessarily prescribe to organizations which committees you form and how you form them, because there is a myriad of organizations. They work in very different environments. So some organizations, they may find they have a lot of ESG issues, and it's not easy to fit all of those with the agenda of the Social and Ethics Committee. So in that case, yes, you may form a separate one, but ideally, for many organizations, I'll say for the majority that I can think of, it makes sense to actually handle all of those matters together. In all the organizations I've been, we've handled it all in the Social and Ethics Committee. We've not separated it to a ESG committee and the Social and Ethics Committee, because the subject matter and even the perspectives that you take on it, because what is very important with committees is what perspective. We might discuss the same subject, but from different perspectives. So it's not just about what is the subject, it's what is the perspective from which you are handling that particular subject. So I would actually think that it actually is fitting. On the area issue you raised, or the question that you discussed on SMMEs, I think it's a very exciting trend for me, because it also confirms that what we've already seen in the study, that majority of the companies are not forming as social and ethics committees for compliance sake. They are actually forming it because they see value in what they do. So what is coming through from the SMMEs is actually saying, even though from a legal point of view, they may not have a public interest score of more than 500, where they will then be required to form a social and ethics committee, but they see it as necessary and they want to do it because they see the value in the, and that's what King actually is all about. It's not doing things because you just want to tick a box. It's doing things because you want to have good governance, and good governance creates value for you and your stakeholders. So I think it's a very good thing that we are seeing. Thanks, Diane.
And Tommy, before I ask you to comment, I want to throw in another question in here, also related to this, but also very much related to the point that Simo just made, that very often different board committees can look at the same issue, but they do so from different perspectives, or they look through different lenses, and therefore there's not an overlap, but they actually complement one another. And Bongiwe here asks, is there room to delve more deeply into the overlapping issues between risk and social and ethics committee as an entry point for engagement? For example, the climate risk issues and the opportunity they present for socio-economic advancement and business continuity. So maybe if you can also react to that, and Simo, you are more than welcome to come back into the conversation should you wish to do so.
Yeah, I think that the point that I would like to make is that in the first place, one needs to look and say, what is the business we're in as a company, right? Therefore, what are the committees that we require, right? And then through the company secretarial environment, decide what the terms of references are for each of the committees, right? So that, yes, there will be certain issues that, that overlap into different committees, but as Simo says, if they're looking at it with different lenses, the outcome is so much better. It's the whole HR thing about multidisciplinary teams, and the impact of that, right? So yes, there will be risk. There'll be audit overlays. There'll be risk overlays. There'll be strategic overlays. There will be, process overlays as well, IT, in terms of how it's all done, right, with social and ethics. But I think the Act requires that the Social and Ethics Committee gives assurance. Is it the Act or the King Commission? I can't quite remember which way it is, but the guidelines say that the Social and Ethics Committee's role is to give assurance to the reader of the IR report that things have been done. Right. So first and foremost, social and ethics doesn't have to do everything. So when we talk about mandate and the broadening of the committee topics that they have to talk about and things that they have to do, some of the things they don't have to do the operational stuff around it. Right. All they have to do is to give assurance to the shareholder or stakeholders that this issue has been considered within the boardroom table or on the boardroom table. Right. And they can do that through the work of other committees, right? And so that when they get to the IR report, they actually can comment and say, we can give assurance that this matter was dealt with. Right? I have sat in an organization where they have got, and I think somebody commented about a similar organization where you have the safety and safety part, safety and health, I think it's called, in one committee, and then sustainability is dealt with under audit, right? Because it's talked about initially financial sustainability, and so then social and ethics are on their own, right? In that particular committee, and transformation is put in with the human resources in REMCO committee. At the end of the day, are all these things being issued and dealt with, and are different eyes looking at those various aspects, right, as a whole? And I found that the only way really to ensure that the overlaps are taken care of, are, seen through, and the various eyes I looked at, is to look at the terms of reference and ensure that those actually are covered that way. And as boards, we are obliged to review, regularly. Some of them do it annually, some of them do it every second year, their terms of reference. So it can change with the times, as time unfolds. I think that would be my contribution to that part of the debate.
Okay, and Simo, would you like to add something on the relationship between the social and ethics, risk, audit, other committees?
Yeah, look, as I indicated, Dion, the perspectives might be slightly different. For instance, risk will look at the risk management process, the risk governance process. That includes ethical risks, for instance. Whereas when we look at ethics from a social and ethics committee, we look at the management of ethics, the development of the culture of ethics in the organization, and where we are going with it. And when audit looks at it, they will be looking at assurance given to our stakeholders on management of ethics, on management of ethical risks. So they will be looking at it very much from an assurance point of view. Even though you are dealing with ethics, we might actually be looking at it slightly differently in terms of those perspectives that we talked about. I also want to add, though, that sometimes you look at a matter. For instance, in a mining board where I served in the past, safety became a very technical subject. And you don't have the technical skills in the social and ethics to delve into the technical aspects of safety. So we got the technical committee to look at that, and twice a year, we would then sit down and talk as the social and ethics committee about the ethical and social implications of an unsafe work environment and the direction that our work environment is taking and how we deal with the whole matter. So you look at it from a much more broader perspective as a social and ethics committee. So sometimes you do need that because we give it a different lens, but we don't have the technical skills to go underground and fix ventilation and fix blasting, because those are very technical issues. So you want to give it to those people. The important thing for me, Dion, is where we tend to then look at these commonalities and combine committees. Like I saw on the trend survey that even though it's a minority, some are putting it to the audit committee. It's very important to be careful that one does not become a poorer cousin of the other. You must be very clear in your terms of reference. You must be very clear in your work plans, because when you put it with things that tend to have agency like audit, you might then deal with it on an ad hoc basis and no longer focus on the subject of social and ethics as the primary driver of your deliberations and discussions. So there's a lot you can do, but you must also be careful not to actually create problems in terms of the focus of the committee, the time the committee has to address the issues from the correct perspective. So that's what I would advise on. Thanks.
Okay. Both of you in your initial responses touched upon the whole matter of remuneration. And we have been lamenting this for the last 3 years, because year after year, we see this happening. I want us to take a bit of a forward-looking perspective here and say, how can this be changed? I know one of our participants suggested also in the Q&A that maybe we should make this a topic of board conversation. In other words, take the findings that we've seen this year again, third year in a row, take it to the board and have a proper, open, frank conversation about this at board level, or ask your REMCO or your NOMCO about this. But I would like to hear from both of you, Ntombi, starting with you. How do we take this forward? How do we make sure that in 3 years from now, we're not sitting here and bemoaning the fact again that social and ethics committees remuneration is not on par with other committees?
Okay, I think that, well, I think we have to continue doing the campaigning that we are doing, right? But I also think that if we look at what is coming through in the New Companies Act in terms of the various committees, there is a chance that this may also shift, right? You know, the requirement of social and ethics committees has, you know, their role is increased, right? If one can put it that way, in terms of being a statutory committee, and the requirements that are asked for, right? I've seen in some different roles, I am also REMCO chair, I have seen an increase in the number of companies that are saying we need to increase that. But that, I mean, I operate in listed companies, so that's what I'm seeing in listed companies, that there's more parity being requested or put forward in terms of the fees, so that perhaps the audit committee still is most highly paid, but the other committees come better up, if I can put it that way. I was interested to see that in our survey here, that the nominations committee, and as was said by Paul, which tends to be an ad hoc committee, seems to be paying more than the social and ethics committee, which is a more stable and permanent committee, right? And that was an interesting sort of observation from on my part. But I think also it's got to do with the fact that in the eyes of most companies, there's too many people sitting on that social and ethics committee, so don't want to pay too much. I don't know. I'm just supposing. I don't know, because you tend to find that the audit committee is quite large, but it's full of accountants who are paid by the auditors, and then 2 or 3 independent NEDs, and then whoever they bring from the company. But the social and ethics committee will be 3 non-executive, independent non-executive directors, and a plethora of management people coming into that meeting, and maybe there's a room for us as social and ethics chairs and participants to sort of monitor that, right? Because a lot of the stuff really is about reading and engaging your independent opinion as a non-executive director. It's not about presentations. Presentations don't take us anywhere, right? Well, they don't take us as far as we would like them, like it to be. So I think there is a move forward. I think there is a change, but the hardcore hasn't happened yet. The level of engagement around that, and it will be forced. With the green funding and development funding that's coming through, we'll be forced as businesses to take social and ethics issues more seriously, and will therefore have to pay for them, because they are experts in the area who we will have to rely on, and they are definitely not all accountants, if I can put it that way, or engineers.
Yeah, it's interesting, and you would have seen it since you had access to the full report, that for the first time this year, we also started looking at the disciplinary background of people serving on social and ethics committees. And you are right, it is quite diverse, the backgrounds, academic backgrounds that people, or professional backgrounds that people come from. But Simu, what remedy do you have to fix this remuneration problem?
Yeah, when it comes to money, I tend to think very differently. So you will pardon me for this. First, I just want to say that I don't subscribe to money being linked to leadership, because we don't have enough money in the world to pay for real good leadership. So we'll never pay any of the board members, particularly social and ethics, enough. And I always argue that if leadership was about money, the idols in leadership, the celebrated legends in leadership like Mandela, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, whoever you look at, would never have done what they did, because many of them were not paid a cent for that. So I want to put that up front as a context, because I don't want money to become the subject of what we are dealing with and how significant it is. Quite often, initiators of many of the leadership initiatives that benefit us as humanity in the long run don't get paid or did not get paid when they actually initiated bulk of those. Secondly, why are audit committees paid the most? It's a discipline that has existed for a very long period of time. It has standards, it has processes, it created over a period of time a perception of how significant it is and how important it is for the success of the organization. Social and Ethics Committee is not there yet. It will get there. I think there will be a lot more standardization. We can see already efforts being put into standardization of sustainability reporting, for instance, around the globe. So as we get that discipline, I think IFRS Foundation is one of the entities that are working hard on that. So as we get that, the committee will develop in that stature and will get recognized in terms of its significance, and financially, then you would start to see more remuneration coming in. But for me, that is secondary. Time will actually yield that. Of course, we must talk about it. I don't disagree with us talking about it and continuously placing focus on what needs to be done, but it can never be the primary driver of what we think social and ethics committees should be about and should be doing. So there is a process, and I can see it starting, that will take us there, in my view. And of course, we have to add to it to create that awareness in the boards, the remuneration committees, in terms of the imbalance that currently exists, because that's basically what it is. It's also because of what I mentioned earlier, that the impact of what we get into as organizations as a result of poor leadership on social and ethics tend to come over a long period of time. I made an example with a community that came and talked to us about what they've been experiencing from the 30s to the present, and we were totally blind to that perception. And it's that blindness. It's not that the matters are not there, they are not developing, they are not actually with us, but we tend to be blind, and therefore we place lesser significance to any effort to attend to those community issues, social issues, and issues that are really important for our social scorecard when you look across the 6 capitals. I also think as we understand the 6 capitals better, and we start to drive our organizations, not out of addressing the natural capital, the social capital, intellectual capital as costs and liabilities, but addressing them as real value creators at the core of our strategy, we'll start to see more recognition. And I think the Social and Ethics Committee should put emphasis, particularly in terms of its strategic thinking, in placing these at a strategic thinking level of the organization, so that we are not seen as problem solvers, but as creators of the future, as inventors of the future. So as we get more of those results, I think the money will follow.
Okay. Yeah, and I think it's important to keep in mind that the Social and Ethics Committee this year only turned 10 years old. So it has just become a teenager committee
Exactly.
compared to other committees that are quite mature. And I think it is part of that growing curve. Andrew Bevan,
I want to disturb you, sorry, man, because my other issue that I talked about earlier seems to be happening now. So
okay.
I'm sorry that I will have to recuse myself. It's not something that was foreseen or planned. It just happened this morning that I had this agent request that I must be available. So it looks like that I have to do now. So I really
Okay.
enjoyed the time I spent with you, and I wish you all the best in the remaining 30 minutes of this session. Thank you very much.
Okay, good. And thank you for your contribution once again. We understand that it's a very urgent matter involving a very important issue, so well understood.
Yes,
And thank you for your contribution. It was really very, very worthwhile having you as part of the panel. Go well. We excuse you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it seems that Andrew Bevan is also echoing a similar sentiment in terms of remuneration. He wrote in the chat, he said, surely with the additional ESG reporting requirements and as a direct result, more workload for the Social and Ethics Committee members, the remuneration should be relative to the additional monitoring and oversight workload. So it seems that there is sort of a trend that we see in terms of expectation that over time we would like to see these changes occurring. But this is why we have this trend survey. We will monitor this, and I think it's also a nice way of keeping it on the agenda. Yes, please.
Before we continue, I just wanted to say that, we also need to be careful to use what variables we use to determine what remuneration should be, right?
Yeah.
Because as Simu said earlier on, the audit practice has been there forever and ever on the boardroom table, and it has been seen as the driver of profit, so to speak, and therefore should be remunerated differently from everyone else, right? And until that swing occurs and changes, it's going to be difficult to break down that. We've got 150 years or more of practice, and you've alluded to that.
Yeah.
I think that what needs also to be taken into account is, at the end of the day, what is it that businesses are there for? If we can define that differently, we will then begin to see the value that each contributor makes, and then value it in accordance fairly, right? Because I mean, I would argue right now that a lot of the audit work is very easy. It's all digitalized, right? Right? There's no more calculations, right? And the level of intelligence required to work out impairments and stuff is exactly the same as one requires to work out whether the community will appreciate and not burn down buildings, right? So it's not about intelligence or contribution, et cetera, or the way that people do work, or the amount of work that people are doing, right? I think it's really about what we're used to, right? And what the new world is looking like. And the new world hasn't really, sort of set down and made itself feel valuable, right? It is changing, and I think we can thank COVID for that, because here I am sitting where I am, and I'm able to participate in a webinar in South Africa, which 4 years ago might have not been so easy.
Yes.
And there's many. The other day I sat in a special board meeting. I was amazed. We were 10 of us on the board, and we had 8 different cities of the world in 5 different time spans, right? Participating in a board meeting, which could not have happened previously. Now, does that make any of us who happen to have been sitting in London on a Sunday morning at 8 o'clock less valuable than the person who's sitting in Perth at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, on a Sunday afternoon, dealing with this matter? It doesn't, so yes, it's a whole different conversation that needs to be, in terms of the value drivers. What is value? What do we define as value? Therefore, how do we actually pay for it?
And coming back to that all-important question, why are we here? What's our purpose? Exactly. And our purpose must be connected to value creation. And what is the value that we create for all different stakeholders, not only for our shareholders, but everyone needs to benefit if we want that sustainable business over time. And that is what governance is all about. And I think it's so well captured in the integrated reporting framework that says governance starts with purpose.
Yes.
And following from that, you have your vision and mission, and then you can start saying, but I can't do it in isolation. I need certain inputs. And then that whole coherent cycle comes into play. Natomi, there are two more areas that I would like to explore with you before we start wrapping up. The first one being reporting to shareholders at the AGM. And we've seen in the survey that the most popular form of reporting is simply through a written report that is submitted to shareholders at the AGM, then followed by a written plus verbal report, or a verbal report that supplements or complements the written report. But we've also seen last year with the Companies Amendment Bill that probably the expectations are going to get higher in future. We probably will only know in the first half of next year what the new Companies Amendment Act will look like. But I think the trend is quite clear. More is expected. In a previous amendment, there was even mention made of the fact that the report must be externally assured before it is delivered to shareholders at the AGM. And now, of course, in the October 21 Companies Amendment Bill, they said that the report by the committee will be put to a binding vote to the shareholders, and should they not approve that, then there must be engagement with dissenting shareholders and the like. Can I ask you, given your experience, especially in the listed company environment, what do you regard as best practice in reporting by the Social and Ethics Committee to shareholders at the AGM? And if you would not mind staring a bit into the crystal ball of the future, how do you think reporting will evolve in coming years?
I do think that it's going to, it's definitely on the change platform, right? And I like personally, and I'm speaking very personally, I like the opportunity to engage with stakeholders, not only shareholders, but stakeholders around what the company is doing, okay? So the AGM is one event of the whole stakeholder engagement process. I like to go out on roadshows with the various management teams and talk to the various stakeholders about what we're doing and whether we're delivering, right? And engaging and learning and finding out what are the needs, and not the needs that we see in our little ivory tower offices and wherever, you know, urban environment. But what really is the need, and what is the impact of the business that we're doing with the people? So I think that we need to broaden it, first of all, right? And say that it's more than shareholders, it's stakeholders, and we can use different ways of engaging with them, right? So when we talk to shareholders, we do talk to them at the AGM, and I think it's important that we do that conversation, but it doesn't stop us from actually going when we do the Remco share road shows or whatever investor shareholder discussions, to also discuss the social and ethics issues, right, that need to be drawn to the attention of shareholders. And I think that from the shareholder side, because of the green funding and the development funding that's coming through, right, they will also require investees, you know, companies, to come with that information to the investment discussions, right? Because investors are now broadening their sort of list of requirements for allowing funding to be put forward, right? So I think somewhere on the chat group, somebody talked about the fact that do we need perhaps environmental experts as well on the Social and Ethics Committee? And I think that's the reason why, because actually, you know, you look at the really the big investors of the New York Stock Exchange guys, and you know, I mean, I think RMB is one of the first ones to put a green fund in our environment, but they're going to require that we actually fulfill the environmental you know, requirements before they give the funding, which will force the boardroom to say, hey, guys, we've got to check our carbon footprint. We've got to check our noise levels. We've got to check, all those things, before we go and apply for funding. So money is no longer just, can you pay it back?
Yeah, no. No, absolutely. And it is something, it's a trend that we also picked up in our monitoring at the Social and Ethics Committee Forum. And that is that especially institutional investors are asking these questions, and they are no longer satisfied with, yes, we have a policy, yes, we have a plan. They're interested in your performance.
Exactly.
And this is one of the reasons why at the moment, a paper that a subgroup of the Social and Ethics Committee Forum is working on is the role of the Social and Ethics Committee when it comes to ESG monitoring and reporting. Because obviously a big part of what we consider to be the focus of ESG does overlap with the mandate of the Social and Ethics Committee. Now, Tommy, the other thing that I would like to ask you about, and you touched on that now in your response to my previous question, was sparked by something that Simo said earlier this morning when he said that they were, as a Social and Ethics Committee, engaged by the local community in which that mine was operating, and the very different type of conversation that was demanded from that community. I would like you to say a bit more. You just briefly touched in passing on stakeholder engagement and your preferences there. But I also sometimes pick up that management say, but this is not the job of the Social and Ethics Committee to engage with communities. It's a management responsibility, and we will report to you. So please stand back. I would love to hear your response, how you would respond to that critique that we sometimes do get from management.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's all about my cabbage patch, don't step into my cabbage patch, etc. And as boards, we need to be careful that we are strategic and not executive, right? My personal view is that if you're going to be strategic, you actually need to feel, right? So let's go back to what we used to do. We used to give checks to people, right? As our social investment or social responsibility. We never bothered what did they do with the money, right? Never really, we were just happy that we had, given them 100,000 Rand or whatever the amount was. Right? Today, it is, often the corporate social investment or responsibility element of the work of the operation is under the Social and Ethics Committee. Right? I encourage personally board member visits, right? And I call them site visits, that we go and we look and we see. So we're not only going to see the operations and see how things are doing, right? We also go and see the places which we have benefited, right? And then that benefit is not just about giving 100,000 and forgetting about it, but using that 100,000 so that it helps that community to do something. So I'm personally more into sort of 5-year funding arrangements as opposed to once-offs, right? So that you can actually make a difference. And in that process, you need to go out there and monitor and observe, because you can't rely as a social and ethics chairperson on what management says, because management's got 3 months, by the way, right? As a minimum to prepare a report that you like, right? Because they know you and know the kind of questions that you're going to ask, right? So you need to go out on your own or with your fellow colleagues and go and observe for yourself. I had a situation, and I think I shared it in the last cycle, where we had, in one company, we had given a hell of a lot of money to an organization. And when I got there, the conditions that the people were participating in, the people who had given the money to do a particular thing, the conditions that they lived in were horrendous, if there's such a word in English, and I blew my top. I said, how can we be associated with such a thing, right? And of course, within the next 12 months, there was great improvement, but I wouldn't have known that, had I not actually gone there myself to observe for myself. And, to link back to what Simo was saying, the different eyes. because everybody was just excited at the fact that we're providing whatever, technical support to the people who, the beneficiaries, so to speak. We didn't look at the bigger picture, and it needed someone else like myself to come in and say, but these people are living in a condition where there's no water, there's no house that they do. So what's the point of putting fancy toilets? Yeah, because there's no water.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm taking it out of context, but that's the kind of thing. So we look at the whole holistic approach, and you can't get that holistic view as an NED or as a board member unless you actually go out to site and visit and see and engage with the people.
Yeah.
Often you walk around in companies on a site visit, and you start to talk to the colleagues who are working, the collar workers, the people, just ask them simple questions. And you find that, in fact, when we're busy complaining, to take it to a remuneration side, complaining that people are not going to school, when people apply, they are told you can't apply for a bursary at this institute unless you are studying in a specific field. Or unless you can, you are earning a specific amount of money. And then you exclude a whole bunch of people who could possibly have benefited and benefit your organization because of the exposure they would have had to some institutional learning opportunity.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I think the whole idea of competence of board members or members of governing bodies is so important. As you were speaking, I was thinking back to Principle 1 of King 4 that speaks about the governing body should lead ethically and effectively. And then it starts looking into, so what are the characteristics that we as governing body members should have? And one of them is competence. Yes. And especially, I think, when it comes to independent non-executive directors, they are so far removed from the reality of the everyday operations that they really need to have their eyes opened and can't just rely merely on management reports. And under that characteristic of competence, it says that board members should have a working knowledge of, amongst other things, the organization and the industry in which it operates. And I find it hard to see how you can really get that working knowledge. If you are, for example, serving on the board of a mining company, you've never visited a mine or a mining community, you are simply blind, and you have to then blindly rely on management. So I think there's a lot of merit in that exposure. But as we both said, which does not mean that you take over the responsibilities of management, but you do benefit clearly from such exposure. And from the work that I do with many social and ethics committees, I often find that feedback, that it was exactly my first-hand exposure that put things into perspective for me, and that also assisted me in making more sense of management reports coming to me.
Exactly. Yeah. And growth for you as an individual, as an individual board member, just because you're a board member doesn't mean you're the concave of all information related to the company. You've got to better your own things, and you've got to be able to learn, right? Because the social ethics committee in a mining company is a very different social ethics committee from a medical health science type of company, or, et cetera, or a technology company. And you can't know those differences and the nuances, right? Unless you engage and get involved with the company,
absolutely.
In the agricultural space also very different.
Yes, yeah. Okay, final question to you, Ntombi, and we are going to wrap up with this. And it was for me quite a pleasing finding in this survey, because in the first two editions of this survey, the 2020 and 2021, the biggest challenge of social and ethics committees has always been that they don't understand their role and function. This year, it has dropped to the third biggest challenge. In other words, we are making progress. It's still a challenge, but it seems that that process is now maturing. Social and ethics committees is starting to get their minds around what they should do. Why do you think this is happening? And yeah, on a more positive note, looking forward to the evolution of the social and ethics committees, what do you expect for the next few years to come?
I am not a futurist. I can't see into the future, but I am very excited, right, by the trajectory that I'm seeing, right? And you said it yourself earlier on, that this committee is a very new committee, right? So initially when the idea came forward, it was like, oh gosh, what are they supposed to do? Nobody, anybody who doesn't have an extra subcommittee, you go to the social and ethics committee and see what you do, and find your feet. But I think that if we look at it, it's actually been a very quick, a quick uptake and evolvement of the committee. So that's exciting for me. Of course, it has been helped by the ESG movement and the green movement, the fact that they have grown and their trajectory has been a much longer process, right? I think that looking into the future, if we have any non-execs sitting in this webinar, one of the things that we would need to do as non-execs is ensure we understand these issues around noise management, around carbon emissions, around the social impact, around the governance, and not governance just straight, who's responsible for what, right? But what actually is governance all about? And that's what Simo was linking everything to, that if we don't have acceptance and understanding of what humanity is all about, right, and how society operates, we're going to find ourselves in very, very difficult spaces, right? And that we stop this whole arrangement of being silo-focused. I'm an accountant, I'm an engineer, and that's all I do. I'm a lawyer, that's all I do. Our lives are not made up of silos. Our lives are made up of all different levels and horizons. And we need to find a way of incorporating all of that and then sharing our experience as non-executive directors. And that's what the kind of governance environment that we will need to have to survive in the future. I mean, if you look at COVID and how the world responded to COVID, and that this whole last 2 years, it was more than just the medical concerns that were taking over, and we still haven't understood why and how and when, and I'm told that, for instance, with the COVID thing, people were talking about it 10 years ago, but we just didn't respond to it. We took a decision to put our heads in the sand and become ostriches, So that's another learning. Let's not become ostriches. Let's
absolutely. Well, there's a lot of people in the chat saying thank you, Ntombi, to you in his absence, also to Simo. It was really, I think, a very, very worthwhile conversation that we had this morning. A lot of new things that we learned. Thank you for the comments from Peter, Michael, Morena, Bongiwe, Beryl, and others that are still coming in, Dawn as well. It was great to have you. Thank you for your questions. And I would also like to say, besides a great thank you once again to Ntombi for joining us, Simo in his presence, but also to Julie. Some of you might not be aware of the fact that this is Julie's last webinar that she will be hosting for the IoDSA. Julie, it has been over the years a huge pleasure to working with someone as professional and as pleasant as you. Best wishes with your new journey, and thank you for all your wonderful support over many years. You are truly appreciated. Thanks a lot, and I hand back to you for a final word.
Thank you, Dion, for those kind words. I've really come to be quite fond of my audience members of my webinar, and I really enjoy hosting these sessions and having these great, fruitful conversations with our members and our great panelists. So thank you very much for that. I would like to hear from our audience members today. On this particular session, I'm going to quickly share my screen, and that's going to give you a QR code. And I'd like you to please scan that QR code and fill in the feedback form, because we'd like to hear your thoughts on the session. It always helps to inform us on next topics that you would like to hear. And then I would like to bid you all a great day and a very fond farewell. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great morning and a great day further. Thank you. Cheerio.